The morning I pressed play on that laptop, I watched 14 people stop breathing at the same time. I need you to hold that image for a moment. 14 people inside my kitchen in Memphis, Tennessee, on a Sunday afternoon in August when the heat had been sitting on the city for weeks without any intention of leaving. My oldest church friends. My son Marcus's aunt on his father's side. Family members who had kept their suspicions tucked carefully behind their smiles for 2 years, and a woman from Adult Protective Services with a legal pad held flat against the table. All of them crowded around my kitchen table. The same round oak table where I fed Marcus his first bowl of oatmeal as a toddler. The same surface that had held 3 decades of Sunday dinners and hard conversations and birthday candles and every kind of moment that makes a house a home. And in the center of that table, where the food usually sat, was my laptop. I pressed play. The timestamp read November 7th, 2022, 6:43 p.m. The security camera footage had that slight gray grain of cheap, practical equipment, the kind that costs $89 installed by a neighbor's nephew on a quiet Saturday morning when nobody is home. But it was clear enough. You could see my kitchen. You could see me at the stove with my back turned, stirring a pot, completely unaware of what was behind me. And then you could see my daughter-in-law Renee walk into the frame with that walk she had, the loose, certain stride of a woman who considers every room she enters to be hers. And she crossed to where I was standing and hit me, open hand, hard, across the side of my face. And when I turned with my palm pressed to my cheek, she leaned in close and said it with the flat, settled certainty of someone stating a fact they have already verified. No one will believe you. The room went completely still. I looked at Renee across my kitchen table and I said, "You were right that I never told anyone. You were wrong about the cameras." But that moment, the one you're already leaning forward to understand, did not arrive by accident. It arrived through a porch, and a royal purple robe, and a rubber band stretched around a stack of bills, and 31 years of a life built in a house in a neighborhood where I thought I knew every corner of what I owned. Let me take you back to where it really started. Memphis in the deep of summer does not ease into the day, even before 6 in the morning, before the light has finished deciding what color it wants to be over the brick row houses. The air is already thick and warm and pressing close against your skin, the kind of heat that makes you feel the full weight of your own body. The working-class neighborhood where I have lived for 31 years has a quiet, early morning rhythm. I know the way I know my own hands. Old Mister. Calvin across the street on his stoop with his coffee, the sprinkler sweeping back and forth 2 doors down, the sound of a screen door banging once and settling, somebody's radio starting up somewhere behind the block. I have sat on my front porch and watched this neighborhood wake up more mornings than I could ever count. I was 64 years old that morning, wrapped in the royal purple robe I put on first thing every single day. It buttons at the collar and falls heavy to my ankles, and it is mine in a way that very little had felt mine for a long time. The fan on the porch floor spun slow and pushed the thick air around in a way that offered acknowledgement more than relief. Inside, through the screen door, my pot of collard greens had been simmering on the stove since before the neighborhood was awake. I start them early when something is sitting heavy in my chest, because tending something low and deliberate steadies me when my thoughts run ahead of my body. The smell drifted out through the screen and mixed with the morning heat. And for just one breath, the world felt the way this house used to feel. Known, mine. Then my eyes went back to what I was holding, the stack of unpaid bills held together with a rubber band. They had come in yesterday's mail, and I had not been able to put them down. Past due utilities, all in my name. The total across that rubber-banded stack came to $4,200. You know that feeling. I know you do. When you hold a piece of paper that should not exist, Not because the numbers are difficult to read, but because you were told, specifically and repeatedly, that everything was taken care of. For months I had been reassured. The accounts were fine, the bills were handled, just let her manage it. If you know someone who is being told not to worry about their own money while notices pile up in their name, please share this story with them. What I was holding on that porch had a name, and knowing the name is the first step toward surviving it. I set the rubber-banded stack on the arm of the porch chair. Marcus's black car sat still in the side driveway. Renee's was gone. She had left early again, without explanation, and I had long stopped wondering where. The fan spun. A dog barked somewhere down the block and went quiet. The neighborhood continued its ordinary morning while I sat in it, holding a question I did not yet have all the pieces to answer. I went inside to check my greens. I stood over the pot and breathed in the slow-rising steam, and I told myself there was a reasonable explanation for those bills. I had been telling myself that for 2.5 years. But that morning, for the first time, the explanation did not come fast enough to cover the feeling underneath it. The crack had already started. I was just the last one to see it. Renee moved into my house on a Tuesday in March, 2.5 years before those bills arrived on my porch. Marcus had been between jobs for 6 months. Good man, hard luck. That's what I told anyone who asked, because that is what mothers do. We name our children's difficulties in ways that preserve their dignity, even when it costs us our own clear vision. And the two of them could no longer manage rent in their apartment. He called after Sunday service and asked if they could stay just temporarily, just until he found his footing. I said yes, because that is what 31 years of keeping an open house had trained me to say. I want to be honest with you about who Renee was in those first months, because I think the honest version matters more than the simpler one. She was not frightening at the door. That is not how this works. And if you believe it only happens when you can see it coming, you will miss it entirely when it arrives wearing something reasonable. She was charming when charm served her. She called me Mom within the first 2 weeks, and I held that word like something given. She said the right things to my church friends when they came by. The Renee who arrived in March was a woman I thought I could understand, and that belief was exactly what she needed from me. Small things began to feel off in a way I kept talking myself out of. The first time she snapped at me, I had asked, quietly and simply, about a utility bill I hadn't received a statement for in a month. She looked at me the way you look at someone who has said something embarrassing in public, and she said, "I handle all of that now. You don't need to worry about it." Then she turned away. I stood in my own kitchen for a moment, feeling oddly scolded, and then I went upstairs to my quilting. I had been quilting blankets for each grandchild for years, working in the corner room upstairs where the afternoon light came in good and steady through the window. Each square I cut and matched and stitched had a particular deliberateness to it that felt, if I am being fully honest, like prayer. The hands occupied so the mind could go somewhere quieter. I had always gone to that room to steady myself. But I noticed in those early months that I was going more and more often, not because I was inspired, because I needed somewhere to put the things I did not know what to do with. She had a difficult upbringing, Marcus told me every time I mentioned something that troubled me about her sharpness. She's under a lot of pressure, and I was gifted at receiving that explanation and filing it in the right place. I had a long shelf in my mind built precisely for explanations like that, and I stacked them carefully, each one a little heavier than the last. This is what nobody tells you about being gaslit from inside a relationship. It does not feel like confusion. It feels like grace. It feels like the mature and reasonable choice to not make things worse. You become so practiced at absorbing the gap between what you sense and what you are told that you stop registering the gap as information. And once that happens, the manipulation has already done its primary work. You are managing yourself on its behalf. She began managing who could reach my phone gradually, with the particular casualness that covers deliberate action. A comment here about someone who always stirred things up. A mild suggestion there that my sister-in-law never meant well. A quiet preference expressed that certain people not call so often. One by one, the people I would have called with a question drifted to the edges of my daily life. I was still going to Sunday service. That was the one thing I held without apology. The 1 hour a week I sat in a pew and let the music and the prayers remind me of who I was before I started getting smaller. But outside of those Sunday mornings, my world had contracted into something Renee found manageable. The collard greens I made every week were the one corner of the house that still felt fully mine. The ritual of them, the long preparation, the slow cook, the smell that meant continuity, connected me to every version of my life that had lived in this kitchen. But I noticed, in those months, that even standing over that pot had begun to feel mechanical rather than sustaining. The smell was the same. The ritual was the same. Something inside it had shifted. I was tending something in a kitchen that had quietly stopped feeling like mine to occupy. One evening in November, I went to check my bank balance online, and my login did not work. I mentioned it to Renee. She said she had called the bank about some security updates, that it was easier to manage things from one place, that she would sort it out the next day. She sorted it out. She just never restored my access. And I let it go. I stacked it on the shelf with all the other reasonable-sounding things, and I went to bed and I said nothing. But something in me, very small and very quiet, did not let it go the same way everything else had gone. Something filed it differently. And that small, quiet something was the beginning of the end of her plan, even though neither of us knew it yet. March 14th, 2023. Started the same way every other day had been starting. The fan going, Renee's car leaving before I was fully awake, the silence of a house where I had learned to ask very few questions. I had not been feeling well for a week, a tiredness that sat behind my eyes and would not clear. I had not mentioned it, because mentioning my health would have brought Renee into the center of a conversation, and I had learned to manage how much center she was allowed to occupy. I was making coffee, standing at the counter, one hand on the cabinet, waiting for the machine to finish. And then the right side of my face went numb, not gradually, not with warning, just suddenly empty. The feeling draining out of it like water leaving a cup when the bottom drops out. My hand on the cabinet could not grip. I sat down very carefully on the kitchen floor because something in the deep, quiet part of me knew to do that before any thought arrived. Marcus found me 20 minutes later. He called an ambulance. 4 days at Memphis Methodist Hospital. A minor stroke is still a stroke, and those 4 days were the 4 longest of my life. Not because of the physical recovery, though that was frightening enough, but because of what those 4 days cracked open. A social worker came on the second afternoon, Patricia, warm eyes, a clipboard, and the particular combination of gentleness and efficiency that the best of them carry. Present, unhurried, the manner of someone who has arranged her professional life around the knowledge that people in hospital beds need time to trust before they can speak honestly. She was there to help me apply for supplemental assistance, she said. She needed to pull my financial records to complete the paperwork. Routine. She went quiet about 3 minutes into looking at her screen, and the quality of that silence changed the temperature of the room entirely. She said there appeared to be 2 credit accounts attached to my Social Security number that weren't reflected in what I had reported. She read the last 4 digits of each one. I did not recognize either. I know you understand what I felt then. That specific sensation when the body receives information the mind has not yet processed. The blood moving strangely, the chest going tight in a way that is not quite pain and not quite fear, but the physical fact of something irreversible being known. Both accounts had been opened in my name. Together they carried $18,400 in balances. Minimum payments had been made on each one. Consistent, calculated, the minimum payment schedule of someone intending to keep a thing invisible for exactly as long as possible. Then she turned the screen so I could see the deposit history. 31 months of Social Security income, redirected. My signature was on an access authorization I had signed the first month Renee and Marcus moved in, just to help with the household bills, she had said, just temporarily, just until things stabilized. And that signature had never been revoked. In black ink on a printed page, 31 months of my income flowing somewhere I had never been permitted to look, because I had been told in every way except directly that looking was something I no longer needed to do. I know what you want me to say happened next. You want me to say I stood up and started demanding answers immediately. I want to tell you honestly, what I did was sit very still. My body went somewhere I had never been, a quietness that had nothing to do with calm, a particular cold clarity that arrives when everything you have been refusing to know lands all at once in a single instant. Patricia stepped out to get water and give me a moment. I reached into the bag Marcus had packed for me from the house. In the outside pocket, because I had tucked them there the same morning I went to the hospital, was the stack of unpaid bills held together with a rubber band, $4,200, past due, all in my name. I held the rubber band between my fingers, and I did the math. $52,700 in redirected Social Security income over 31 months, $18,400 in fraudulent credit accounts with my name on every statement. Utility bills accumulating while I was repeatedly told that everything was handled. I added the numbers twice, then a third time, because some numbers your mind refuses to hold on the first attempt. $71,100. My body went somewhere I had never been and hoped to never go again. The fan in the hospital room kept spinning. The hallway outside my door was ordinary and distant. I stared at the number, and I held the rubber-banded bills in my hands, and I did not look away. Every dollar I could not account for was a day I had called her behavior stress when it was strategy. Every past due notice was a Sunday I had sat in a pew and told myself I was choosing peace when I was choosing silence. The rubber band had held the bills together. I understood now what it actually was. Evidence. When Patricia came back, I looked up from my lap and I said, "Tell me everything." I want to tell you about Darlene, because Darlene is the part of this story I return to whenever I need to remember that the world is not made entirely of people who use closeness as leverage. On the second afternoon in the hospital, the same afternoon Patricia had turned the screen toward me, the same afternoon I had held the rubber-banded bills and done the accounting that changed my understanding of 2.5 years of my own life. The door opened, and a woman walked in, carrying a covered dish wrapped in foil. It took me 3 full seconds to recognize her, because the last time I had truly seen Darlene James was at a backyard cookout in the old neighborhood on the other side of Memphis, 15 years ago at least, at someone's cousin's event, where we had talked for an hour and then drifted back into the separate currents of our separate lives. She had grown up 6 houses from where I grew up. Her mother and my mother had known each other the way women in close neighborhoods know each other. Front doors open, names known, children accounted for without being asked. As adults, we had lost the thread the way adult women lose threads when life moves in different directions, and the distance between 2 daily routines becomes too wide to bridge without effort that neither person makes the time to make. She set the covered dish on the bedside table, pulled the chair close, and sat down. Her cousin worked admissions at the hospital and had mentioned my name. She had come. She looked at me with the kind of attention that is not waiting for its turn to respond, but is actually receiving, actually present, in a way that is rarer than it should be. And she said, "Tell me what happened." So I told her, all of it. The access authorization, the redirected income, the credit accounts opened in my name, the bills accumulating while I was told the accounts were fine, the bank login I lost and never recovered, the way my phone had slowly emptied of the people who might ask inconvenient questions, The way my grandchildren had heard the word confused attached to my name so many times it had become furniture in their understanding of me. The way she had told me, standing 3 feet away in my own kitchen, that I was lucky Marcus kept me around. The way I had gone upstairs and quilted until my hands stopped shaking and called that surviving. I said all of it, and Darlene did not look shocked. She looked like a woman who had been picking up pieces of a story for years and had just been handed the complete picture. She looked like recognition. "She isolated you," Darlene said. "Flat and certain, not a question. Do you understand what that word meant? After 2.5 years of building architecture to explain what had been done to me, after all the grace I had extended and all the explanations I had constructed and maintained, someone sat in a hospital chair and said one word that named the entire shape of what had happened. Not stressed, not struggling, not a difficult personality shaped by a difficult past. Isolated, as in done deliberately, as in a method, as in I was the specific and intentional target. I cried then, the first real tears since Patricia had turned the screen toward me. Darlene opened the covered dish. Sweet potato pie. The smell of it, warm sugar and nutmeg and careful hands, hit me like 30 years of memory arriving all at once, and I cried harder and then felt something loosen in my chest that I had not known was wound tight until it let go. She waited until I was finished. Then she said, "What do you want to do?" It was the first time in 2.5 years that anyone had asked me that. Not what was reasonable. Not what should I consider given everyone's circumstances. Not what could I overlook. What did I want to do? I thought about the rubber-banded bills. I thought about $71,100. I thought about the corner of the ceiling above my stove, where a small camera had been sitting quietly for 7 months, waiting. "I want to do this right," I said. Darlene cut the pie. "Then that's what we'll do." There is a specific kind of performance required when you are quietly dismantling someone's control over your life from the inside of the same house. You have to be entirely unremarkable. You have to be the same woman you have always been. Slow-moving, predictable, the purple robe and the morning greens and the quilting upstairs, while every private hour you carve out for yourself becomes work. You become fluent in invisibility. And as it turned out, I had been practicing that particular skill for 2.5 years without knowing it was preparation for anything. I left the hospital after 4 days with a folder Patricia had helped me build. Printed records of both fraudulent credit accounts, 31 months of redirected deposit documentation, and a copy of the access authorization that had been used as a key to everything I owned. Marcus drove me home. Renee had sent a text that said she was thinking of me. I put the phone face down in my lap and thought, not for much longer. I walked into my kitchen and I started a pot of collard greens, because that is what I always do, and I let Renee watch me do it from the living room doorway with whatever calculation she was running behind her eyes, and I offered her the same soft, ordinary face I had been offering this house for 2.5 years. She saw nothing different. That was entirely the plan. Darlene and I had worked out the sequence during those 4 hospital days, talking in low voices between her visits while Marcus was at work and the hallway outside was quiet. Step 1. Documentation, already assembled. Step 2. Adult Protective Services. Step 3. Bank Fraud Department. Step 4. The people who needed to hear the truth from my mouth in plain words, without softening. I contacted APS within a week of coming home, upstairs in the corner room with my quilting on my lap and Renee's car out of the driveway. The woman I spoke with had a calm, matter-of-fact voice that treated what I was describing as a recognizable situation that happened in the real world to real people. Not the confused account of an old woman, not an exaggeration, but a documented pattern with a documented name. She gave me a case number and her direct extension. I wrote both on a piece of paper and pressed it flat between 2 layers of batting inside my quilting box. Nobody goes looking through a grandmother's quilting box. Now let me tell you about a Tuesday in late April, because this is the detail people respond to most when I tell this story at the Resource Center, and I have come to believe its smallness is precisely the point. Darlene met me near the old neighborhood. A small flower shop in a strip mall with buckets of cut flowers on a cart outside the door and the cold green smell of stems and water that greets you when you step in from the heat. I had driven myself. My car, my name on the registration, my gas in the tank. I walked in, and I chose yellow tulips, bright and uncomplicated, with nothing about them that belonged to anyone's preferences or tastes but mine. I paid with cash. My own money, my own hand extending across the counter. Nobody's permission required, nobody's approval sought. I walked out to the parking lot and sat in my car for a moment, with the yellow tulips in the paper wrapper nodding gently against the passenger seat, and I felt something I want to describe accurately because cheap words would ruin it. Not happiness, exactly. The specific private satisfaction of a woman who has reclaimed 1 square inch of her own life. $11 and change. And it reached down to the bone. The close call came the following week. I came home from an errand to find Renee in the upstairs corner room, going through my quilting box, holding a piece of batting to the light as though she was examining the quality of the fabric. She said she was looking for thread. Her voice was perfectly easy. I crossed the room and took the box from her hands with a steadiness I did not feel in my body, said the thread was in the dresser drawer, and waited until she left the room before I checked beneath the batting. The folded paper with the case number was still there, but she had been in the box. She had been looking, and that told me, in the new language I had been learning, the language of method and intention, that whatever timeline I was working with had just gotten shorter. I called Darlene that night and said, "We need to move faster." I chose my kitchen table for a reason I want to be precise about, because the word symbolic makes it sound grander than it was. It was right, which is a different thing entirely. The kitchen table in that house was mine, in a way nothing else had fully managed to remain. A round oak table, heavy and old, with 31 years of the marks that come from a life actually lived on a surface. I had rearranged rooms around it twice. It had held birthday cakes and tax documents and church bulletins and school projects and every meal I had ever cooked that mattered. It was the place Renee preferred for the financial conversations she controlled. Sit down here, the bill is handled, there's nothing to worry about. And I understood, from the clarity I had been building since the hospital, that reclaiming it as the stage for the truth was exactly correct. I spent 6 weeks building what needed to be built. Darlene helped me organize everything into a tabbed binder: credit account records, deposit histories, the signed authorization, the fraud report opened by the bank, correspondence with the APS caseworker. The bank had opened its own internal investigation and begun recovery proceedings. The fraud referral had been forwarded to the district attorney's office. The paper trail was in official hands, moving through official channels beyond anyone's ability to quietly manage away. One by one, I made my calls. Marcus's aunt picked up on the second ring and said, before I had finished explaining, "I have been waiting for this call." She had kept a watchful, careful distance from Renee for years. She had sensed something, the way attentive women sense things. But without evidence, she had only intuition. I gave her the evidence. I said it in the same plain words I had used with Patricia and Darlene and the woman at APS. She redirected my Social Security income for 31 months. She opened credit accounts in my name without my knowledge. She ran up over $18,000 in debt carrying my name. I have the records, the case number, the documentation in official hands. I called my pastor. I called my oldest church friends. I reached out to family members who had watched from careful distances and stayed quiet out of respect for Marcus's marriage. One by one, I said it plainly. Now, about the cameras and the full truth of how they came to exist. 7 months before the hospital, before Patricia and the records, before the rubber-banded bills had grown to $4,000. I had stood in my bathroom one morning, looking at a bruise on my upper arm where Renee had grabbed me hard enough to leave the shape of her fingers against my skin, and I had thought, with a cold, still quietness, no one will believe me. not because I doubted myself. Because she had spent months building a narrative about my confusion that would make any account I gave sound like a symptom of exactly what she had been describing. I understood that. And I understood that the only answer to a manufactured narrative is evidence that does not require anyone's belief in order to exist. Deontay, a neighbor's nephew who did security installations, came on a Saturday when both Marcus and Renee were out. 2 small cameras, one covering the kitchen table, one angled toward the stove. $89 total, cash. He was done in under an hour. I closed the door behind him and stood alone in my kitchen and looked up at the corner where one of the cameras now lived, quiet and patient, and I thought, now we wait. Renee had told Marcus at my dinner table that she wanted a Jaguar XJ someday. Classic black, she had specified, with the easy confidence of someone who expects things to come to them as a matter of course. She deserved it, she said. I had heard those words and felt something cold move through my chest, because I knew what she considered work, and I knew whose income had been building the foundation she intended to stand on. The Jaguar XJ in classic black was not going to be parked in my driveway. I called the family meeting for the second Sunday of August. 14 people confirmed. The trap was set. The morning of the second Sunday of August, I was on my front porch before 5, in my royal purple robe, with coffee in both hands and the fan turning behind me, watching the dark neighborhood sit in the last of the night air before the heat claimed the day entirely. Even at 5 in the morning, the August air in Memphis was warm and thick, pressing against everything without apology. I let myself feel what I had been keeping at a managed distance for 6 weeks of preparation. Grief first. For 2.5 years of a household I had tried to hold together. For the distance that had opened between Marcus and me while Renee constructed her story about my confusion. For the version of her I had tried to love in those first charming months, or had loved the idea of, which is the more honest account. Because I think I had always been in love with what she pretended to be, rather than what she was. And underneath the grief, something that sat lower and held it up like a floor. Not strength. That word is too borrowed from other people's situations. The feeling of a woman who has stopped carrying something she was never supposed to carry alone. I went inside and started the collard greens. People arrived at 1 o'clock. Darlene came first, and we arranged the chairs and set the documentation binder in the center of the table without much conversation. The way you work alongside someone when the task is serious. Marcus's aunt arrived in a church dress, and the expression of a woman who has been patient for a very long time and is finally done being patient. My 2 oldest church friends came together in the same car. The APS representative introduced herself to the room with the professional stillness of someone who has held the space in situations like this before and knows how to keep proceedings stable. Other family members came in 1s and 2s, each carrying their own version of what they had suspected and kept quiet about for years. Marcus was already at the end of the table, arms folded, jaw set, wearing the expression of a man who does not yet know which version of his own life he is about to inhabit. Renee arrived at 1:15 after everyone else. That was intentional. She walked into a kitchen full of people, and I watched her face perform the rapid calculation she always made when conditions weren't what she'd expected. Surprise, reorientation, and then that settled composure. The flat, even expression she used when she had decided to manage a situation rather than respond to it. She looked around the room. She looked at the APS representative. She looked at me. "What is this?" she said. "Sit down, Renee," I said. She sat. I placed the binder on the center of the table and told the room what the record showed in the same plain words I had used with each of them individually. 31 months of redirected income, 2 fraudulent credit accounts, $71,100 removed from my life while I was told, over and over, that everything was handled. Renee began to speak. I let her speak for 30 seconds, the familiar sequence I could have written out in advance, confusion, mischaracterization, the look toward Marcus for the backup she had always counted on, the suggestion, made with practiced indirectness, that I was misremembering. I opened the laptop. The timestamp, November 7th, 2022, 6:43 p.m. The kitchen. Me at the stove. Renee walking into the frame. The sound of the impact, clear in the audio. And then her voice, close, flat, certain. No one will believe you. Nobody moved. 14 people held the same breath in the same kitchen at the same time. I looked at her across the table that had been mine for 31 years, and I said, "You were right that I never told anyone. You were wrong about the cameras." She had nothing. For the first time in 2.5 years, in a room full of witnesses, Renee had nothing. The composure that had served her through hundreds of smaller rooms had no script for this one. I turned to Marcus. He was staring at the frozen image on the screen, and his face had changed into something I did not have a precise word for. Not guilt alone, and not grief alone, but something beneath both of them, something being dismantled at the foundation. I looked at my son, and I said, "She didn't steal from a confused old woman. She stole from the woman who built everything you ever had." The room stayed completely still. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment, because you deserve the truth of it, and not the triumphant version. It was not victory. Not yet. It was the particular quietness of a thing finally being what it actually is. Not what someone insisted it was. Not what you tried to believe it was. But what it always, underneath everything, actually was. The APS representative cleared her throat and said she would need statements from everyone present. The truth had landed. And truth, when it finally lands in a room that has been holding a lie, it does not crash in. It settles, like weight finally going to the right floor. Let me tell you the truth about the aftermath. Because this is the part that stories like mine sometimes soften for the comfort of the listener, and I am not interested in comfort at the expense of accuracy. Marcus's family divided. That is the honest word for it. Not had mixed reactions. Not needed time to process. Divided, the way a thing divides when a stress it cannot absorb is finally applied to it. Some people called me. Some people called Renee. Some went entirely quiet, which I came to read as its own kind of answer. The answer of someone who found the easier version of the story more manageable than the true one. 2 people I had known for 15 years, people who had sat beside me in pews and shared my table at holidays, stopped returning my calls. I sat with that for several days before I understood it, and then I let it go because I had spent 2.5 years managing other people's comfort at the cost of my own truth, and that particular labor was finished. Renee and Marcus moved out within 3 weeks of that Sunday. Marcus did not speak to me for 4 months. When he finally called, his voice was stripped of the certainty he had always carried, quieter than I had ever heard it, and I listened to him talk for a long time without saying much in response, because grief and accountability wear the same expression in a voice you have loved since it was brand new, and I was not in a hurry to confuse them. On the official side, this is what happened. The APS case was formally assigned and progressed. The fraud referral reached the district attorney's office. The bank completed its internal investigation and began recovery proceedings on the unauthorized accounts. Renee lost access to my finances permanently and on the record. She lost the narrative she had spent 2.5 years building about my mental state. That narrative was now a matter of official documentation, witnessed by 14 people, supported by camera footage, referenced across multiple agency filings, and impossible to take back. You cannot unring that bell. You cannot unplay what 14 people watched with their own eyes. She did not go to prison that year. The legal system moves in its own time, and I have made my peace with that. Because I discovered something about internal justice that I want to share carefully. The rubber-banded stack of bills, the stack I had carried from my porch to the hospital bag to the hospital room and back, I sorted through one by one over the following weeks, working account by account through the bank's recovery process, calling utility companies, reporting fraud, filing documentation. When I had handled the last of them, I sat at my kitchen table with nothing left in my hands but the rubber band, the bills all separated and addressed and filed. I stretched the rubber band over my wrist like a bracelet and held it there for a moment. Then I walked upstairs to the corner room and set it in a small dish on the windowsill next to my quilting supplies, not to remember what was stolen, as a marker of where something ended and something else began, as evidence that I had counted everything and survived the counting. Darlene helped me move in September. I had not planned to leave so soon, but one morning I woke early and understood without deliberation that the house had finished being mine. Not because she had taken it, it was still in my name, still my property, but because I had already left it in every way that mattered, and remaining was only formality. 2 men from Darlene's church moved my things on a Saturday, lifting furniture and saying nothing unnecessary. I drove my own car to a small house 3 blocks from where I grew up. In the old neighborhood, where the streets look the way they looked when I was 7, and the people who live there still know my mother's name. The woman who rented me the place had big old oaks in the front yard that broke the summer heat into patches of moving shade on the sidewalk. I stood on that front porch with boxes stacked in the doorway behind me, and breathed in the air of a street I had known before I knew anything complicated about the world, and I felt, physically, in my chest and in my feet on that porch, the specific sensation of arriving somewhere rather than only leaving. Through a seniors' resource center in Memphis, I began sitting with other women. Women who had been financially exploited by people who had called them family. Women who had been called confused and forgetful while their income moved quietly through accounts they couldn't access. Women who were holding their own rubber-banded stacks of papers and could not yet name what they were holding. I helped them name it. I tell them what it looked like from the inside, and I watch their faces when the right word lands, and the whole shape of what happened to them becomes finally visible. Darlene comes with me sometimes. She sits in the back with her arms folded and her steady patience, and I think about a hospital room and a covered dish and one word, isolated, arriving in a sentence like a key turning in a lock that had been stuck for years. Some fortune is counted in dollars. Some of it is counted in the people who show up at your hospital room with sweet potato pie and nowhere else they'd rather be. I have learned to count both, and I know which one holds longer. It is October now, and the heat has finally let go. Not dramatically, not the way seasons change in the version of stories we tell ourselves, not as a sudden liberation. Gradually, the way real things change, one cooler morning at a time, until one day you realize you haven't run the fan when you woke up, and the coffee is still hot when you finish the first cup. The oaks outside my window have begun to turn at the edges, that first tentative shift from green to something warmer, and the morning light comes in at the low October angle that makes everything in the room look considered and deliberate, like someone arranged it for exactly this purpose. I am 64 years old, and I am quilting by a window that gets beautiful morning light, in a house in the neighborhood where I grew up, and the woman next door knew my mother, and the child across the street waves when I sit on the porch. And none of that is small. None of it is incidental. It is, in fact, the whole point. The advocacy work I do at the Seniors Resource Center has taught me more about what was done to me than I understood while I was inside it. Sitting with other women, hearing their accounts, watching the patterns repeat with the same structure and the same sequence and the same language across situation after situation. That is how I came to understand that what happened in my house was not personal in the way abuse feels personal from inside it. It was a method, recognizable, replicable, documented. A method with a name and a shape and a reliable sequence. And I want to describe it to you now, because this is the most important thing I have to say in this entire story. It starts with access. A request arrives at a moment of genuine difficulty, and it seems modest and reasonable. You sign something. You hand something over in good faith, and at that specific moment of trust, the architecture begins. Then comes isolation, never sudden, never obvious. A comment here about someone who causes problems. A mild suggestion there about a relationship that takes too much from you. A quiet management of who is and is not present in your daily life. Individual pieces look like circumstances. You do not notice the structure being removed until you reach for support and discover it is no longer there. Then comes the narrative. You are described consistently across multiple conversations with multiple people over months as confused, forgetful, emotional, prone to misremembering. This description is maintained and reinforced until the moment you contradict it. The contradiction sounds exactly like the symptom they have been reporting all along. It is a system designed to make the truth indistinguishable from confusion. And through all of it, the money moves, quietly, methodically, with just enough managed minimum payment to keep the silence from breaking. I want to give you real numbers now, because numbers make things undeniable in a way that narrative sometimes cannot. The states with the highest reported cases of elder financial abuse are California, with 11,622 victims, Florida with 8,138, and Texas with 7,035. And those are only the reported cases. Research consistently estimates that what gets reported represents a fraction of what is actually occurring inside American households. Losses from this kind of exploitation increased 11% from the previous year. Not held steady, increased. This is accelerating in houses like mine, in neighborhoods like this one, right now, while you are listening. The cameras I installed cost $89. What I am about to tell you costs nothing at all. Recognition is the first defense. If someone in your life has recently been given financial access they did not previously have, and you have gradually lost connection with the people who used to ask you questions, stop. Do the math yourself. Ask to see the statements with your name on them. You are allowed to look at your own finances. You are allowed to know your own numbers. You are allowed to ask why something does not add up. And if you have ever been told that you are too confused or too forgetful to handle your own money, write that sentence down and say it out loud to someone outside that house. That sentence is not care. That sentence is a method. The difference between those two things cost me $71,100 and 2.5 years of my life. And I am telling you now so that it does not cost you the same. Someday, and I believe this with the full certainty of a woman who has earned the right to believe it, a Jaguar XJ in classic black will be parked in front of whatever house I have chosen to make mine next, and I will walk out of it dressed exactly as I please and go wherever I decide to go. Not because I need the car, because I spent 2.5 years being told what I could and could not have in a house I built with my own hands, and I have earned the small, beautiful extravagance of a completely free choice. I bought yellow tulips, $11 and change. My own hand over the counter, nobody's permission required. Everything I have built since then has started from those $11. Now I am asking you, where are you listening to this today? What city, what street, what porch are you on? And if you know a woman who has been told she is confused while someone else manages her money, what would you do? If this story reached something true in you, please like it so that it can reach someone who needs it. Subscribe, because the stories on this channel are for the women who are still on their own porches with rubber-banded stacks of papers they have not yet been able to name. And leave me a comment. I read every single one, because the women I sit with at the Resource Center every week remind me that the most powerful thing any of us can do is refuse to let each other be the last to know. None of us should be the last to know. Not anymore.